The breakthrough you've been praying for is being held hostage by jealousy. You don't even recognize as sin because it disguises itself as righteous discernment about unfairness, presents itself as justified frustration about others' undeserved success, and masquerades as spiritual concern about how God is blessing people who aren't as faithful, dedicated, or worthy as you secretly believe yourself to be. Right now, while you're wondering why your prayers seem stuck, why doors remain closed despite your faithfulness, and why others are experiencing the very breakthroughs you've been interceding for, there's a hidden sin operating in your heart that James 3:16 warns creates disorder and every evil practice. The jealousy that you've sanitized with religious language, rationalized through comparison, and justified through detailed mental catalogs of why you deserve what others have received, while they somehow got ahead through luck, connections, or compromises you're too righteous to make. If you're tired of feeling stuck while watching others advance, exhausted from the mental gymnastics required to celebrate successes that trigger your secret resentment, and ready to understand why Proverbs 14:30 declares that envy rots the bones and how this hidden sin is literally blocking the blessings God has been trying to release into your life, you need to subscribe to Faith Ablaze Network and hit that notification bell immediately, because what I'm about to expose will reveal the shocking ways jealousy operates in believers who would never admit to this sin, yet demonstrate it daily through thoughts they nurture, conversations they participate in, and the inability to genuinely rejoice when God blesses someone else in ways they wish He would bless them. The first devastating truth about hidden jealousy is how it always begins with comparison, that 1 Corinthians 10:12 warns against when it declares that those who measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves among themselves are not wise. Yet your mind defaults to this deadly practice every time you hear about someone's promotion, see another person's relationship success, or witness breakthrough in areas where you're still experiencing frustration and delay. What makes this particularly dangerous is that comparison creates a false scoreboard where you're constantly evaluating whether life is fair, whether God is showing favoritism, and whether you're getting the recognition, rewards, and results that your sacrifices deserve, when actually Romans 9:16 reveals that blessing doesn't depend on human desire or effort, but on God's mercy, meaning He's sovereign to bless whom He chooses, when He chooses, and how He chooses without needing your approval or understanding of His timing and methods. The enemy knows that comparison breeds jealousy, jealousy produces bitterness, and bitterness blocks blessing by creating a heart posture that's constantly dissatisfied with God's goodness rather than grateful for His faithfulness, regardless of what He's doing in other people's lives. And this heart condition becomes a spiritual wall that prevents the very breakthrough you're desperately seeking, because Psalm 66:18 declares that if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me, meaning unrepented jealousy functions as static that disrupts your prayer connection and delays your answers. The second hidden mechanism through which jealousy blocks blessing is the way it prevents you from genuinely celebrating others' success, which violates Romans 12:15's instruction to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And this inability to celebrate what God does for others creates spiritual barriers, because your jealousy is essentially questioning God's justice, His fairness, and His wisdom in blessing someone you secretly believe is less deserving than you. When you hear about someone's answered prayer, and your first internal response is explaining why they didn't deserve it, cataloging their failures that should disqualify them, or creating narratives about how they achieved success through methods you're too spiritual to employ, you're not demonstrating discernment, you're manifesting jealousy that's dressed in religious clothing but operates with demonic effect, because James 3:14-15 warns that if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, this wisdom doesn't descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. What few believers understand is that your ability to genuinely celebrate God's blessing in someone else's life, without comparing it to your situation, without calculating whether they deserve it, and without secretly wishing they would experience setbacks, is actually a spiritual test that determines whether you're ready for your own breakthrough, because Luke 16:10 declares that whoever ever is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And if you can't be trusted to celebrate God's work in someone else's story, why should He trust you to steward the blessing He wants to release in yours? The third shocking way hidden jealousy sabotages your blessing is through the words you speak when discussing others' success. Because while you'd never say, "I'm jealous," directly, your conversations reveal your heart through subtle criticisms, spiritual-sounding concerns, and the need to balance every acknowledgement of someone's blessing with reminders of their flaws, their struggles, or the ways they're not as far along as they appear. Matthew 12:34 declares that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, meaning the words you choose when talking about others' promotions, relationships, or breakthroughs expose whether your heart is genuinely grateful for God's goodness or secretly resentful that He distributed that goodness to someone else instead of you. And these seemingly innocent comments create spiritual consequences because Proverbs 18:21 reveals that death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. When you participate in conversations that tear down what God has built up, question the legitimacy of others' blessings, or find ways to diminish the significance of their breakthroughs through spiritual-sounding critique, you're not protecting truth. You're partnering with jealousy that blocks your own blessing because God resists the proud, according to James 4:6, but gives grace to the humble. And there's no humility in the heart that needs to minimize others' success to feel better about personal delays. The fourth hidden dimension of how jealousy prevents breakthrough is the way it distorts your perception of God's character, making you believe He's playing favorites, withholding good things arbitrarily, or blessing people who don't deserve it while ignoring your faithfulness. When actually, Lamentations 3:25 declares that the Lord is good to those who wait for Him and to the soul who seeks Him, and Psalm 84:11 promises that no good thing will He withhold from those who walk uprightly. Your jealousy creates a false narrative where God is unfair, unpredictable, and unreliable rather than recognizing that His timing is perfect, His methods are wise, and His delays are always purposeful rather than punitive. But when jealousy clouds your perspective, you can't see His goodness in your waiting because you're too focused on resenting His blessing in someone else's receiving. What makes this particularly devastating is that this distorted view of God destroys the faith necessary to receive breakthrough, because Hebrews 11:6 declares that without faith it's impossible to please God, and whoever comes to Him must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Yet your jealousy has convinced you that He's not a faithful rewarder, but an inconsistent distributor of blessings who can't be trusted to do right by you. And this lack of trust becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where your inability to believe His goodness prevents you from positioning yourself to receive the very blessing your jealousy insists He's withholding. The fifth and most powerful truth about how hidden jealousy blocks blessing is understanding that Proverbs 27:4 declares that wrath is cruel and anger is outrageous. But who can stand before jealousy? Meaning jealousy is actually more dangerous than rage or fury because it operates covertly through thoughts you justify, comparisons you normalize, and resentments you rationalize until your entire perspective becomes poisoned by a sin you never acknowledged as sin. The pathway out of this blessing-blocking jealousy isn't found through trying harder to be happy for others while secretly seething inside, but through the radical humility that Philippians 2:3-4 describes when it instructs believers to do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves. And to look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others, which means celebrating someone else's blessing with the same enthusiasm you'd want them to celebrate yours, requires dying to the flesh that demands fairness and surrendering to the Spirit that produces genuine love that 1 Corinthians 13:4 describes as patient and kind, not envious or boastful, meaning authentic love eliminates jealousy by replacing the comparison that breeds resentment with contentment that trusts God's goodness, regardless of what He's doing in anyone else's life. The question isn't whether you've experienced jealous thoughts. The question is whether you'll continue nurturing them through comparison, justifying them through perceived unfairness, and disguising them as spiritual discernment when they're actually blocking the breakthrough you've been praying for, or whether you'll have the courage to repent of this hidden sin by confessing it specifically, renouncing the comparisons that feed it, and choosing to celebrate God's blessing in others' lives with such genuine enthusiasm that your heart posture shifts from "why them and not me" to If God can do it for them, He can do it for me, and I rejoice in His goodness, regardless of when my breakthrough arrives. The moment you understand that Galatians 6:4 instructs each one to test their own work, and then their rejoicing will be in themselves alone and not in another, meaning your blessing isn't delayed by what God does for someone else, but potentially blocked by your response to what He does for them. You position yourself to experience the breakthrough that's been waiting for you to deal with the jealousy that's been functioning as a spiritual barrier, preventing the very answers to prayer that your resentment claims God is unfairly withholding while blessing less deserving people, when actually He's been waiting for you to develop the character that celebrates His goodness in others' lives, so He can trust you to steward His goodness in yours, without your success becoming the source of pride that would corrupt the calling He's been preparing you to fulfill. And if this message is exposing something in your heart right now, if you can feel the Holy Spirit putting His finger on areas you've ignored, minimized, or justified, don't just click away and pretend this was another interesting teaching. If you're serious about breaking the spiritual barriers that have been blocking your blessing, you need to subscribe to Faith Ablaze Network right now, because the next revelations God has me releasing are not casual, comfortable devotionals. They are spiritual heart surgery designed to confront the very sins, mindsets, and hidden attitudes the enemy uses to keep believers stuck in cycles they were born to break. So, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and like this video with intention, not as a gesture of support, but as a declaration that you refuse to let jealousy, comparison, resentment, or hidden sin sabotage another season of your life. And before you leave, hype this video. Not for algorithm reasons, but because every time you do, YouTube pushes this message to believers who desperately need the same breakthrough you're stepping into right now. Drop a comment as an act of faith. Declare what you're letting go of, what you're surrendering, and what you're refusing to carry into your next season. Because sometimes breakthrough begins with confession, and sometimes the first step toward freedom is typing out the truth your heart has been afraid to admit. Don't delay. Don't ignore the conviction. Subscribe, like, comment, hype, and step into the freedom God has been waiting to release into your life.